perspective today. We're going to spend the first 5 minutes on kind of context and terminology, make sure we're all talking from the same set of vocabulary, which I think sometimes is a pain point talking about AI. And then I will introduce the panel. I'll kind of start the introductions from what I know, and then I'll ask the panelists to basically finish their own introductions in a way. And then we'll try to follow the title of this panel discussion. We'll try to spend 10 minutes on AI to create, how we leverage AI to create courses to support our course development, AI to support, how we use AI to support our students, and then AI to cheat is kind of this large area of ethics, cheating. To me, it gets into the question of assessment, how assessment might need to change in this new era of AI. And then we should, if we can stay on schedule, have plenty of time for Q&A. And so I would ask that, well, you can either we want. You can put questions in the chat as we go, or you can kind of save them and we'll raise our hands at the end. It'd be nice to get a few folks on camera so that I'm not, always, relaying questions from everyone. It's a small enough group to be able to do that. So let's start by just kind of setting context for where we are. I see this discussion around AI, I made this metaphor recently, as kind of a sprint where we all started at the starting line and things are moving really fast. The sprint has started and some people are sprinting off in all these different directions. And it's a strange sprint because we're not all going in the same direction. We're going in these, a wheel of different directions. And some of us are moving really fast, but a lot of us are still kind of, at this starting line here. And we're reading about these advancements happening in this area, and it's hard to stay centered on, what terminology are we using? What are we talking about here? So I want to set the kind of recent buzz around AI in the context of where I think it fits. And I welcome our panelists to, tell me where I'm misguided on any of this potentially. But artificial intelligence as a term, it's the science of developing machines and systems that mimic human intelligence. That's been around for a long time. Within that, there's this concept of machine learning, which is using data or algorithms that allow machines to train themselves. So as opposed to if I'm developing a piece of software, I need to give it every single rule to know every single output. The machine can kind of train itself and make itself smarter. If you think about those simulations where you tell a machine to learn how to walk, on two legs, that runs through the simulation tens of thousands of times until it can kind of by itself learn how to walk in a way that it designs. Then there's the area of generative AI. So this, as the name implies, using AI to generate new content. This is where you have, Frank Sinatra songs that are, developed by AI, or using AI to create imagery, or AI to write code, AI to make videos. You're generating new content using AI. And then within that, there's a specific branch of generative AI called LLMs, or large language models. And that's often what we will read about when everyone, when people talk about ChatGPT and how that's changing the essay and stuff. What they're really talking about is this branch of AI known as LLMs. When they talk about that, these are tools that are engineered to understand and generate text-based language. And the most common one they always hear is ChatGPT, but there are others like Bard. Bing is based on ChatGPT. There's another one called, I think, Claude. But it is a kind of, distinct segment within AI. So when we hear the term AI, it's often used to mean LLMs. I just want to kind of set us in the context of what an LLM specifically is. I have a few more slides, but I want to get to the panel. So there's a couple of things that are really useful for me when I'm thinking about this. And there are some people on some side of the fence that will say that generative AI and LLMs are wildly intelligent, and there are others that are more skeptical. I think it's a good way to think about LLMs as being very good at understanding and generating language. They're very good at talking. You can see they're very good at, they can write poetry, etc. But they don't truly think about a problem. They don't really know how the world works. They're good enough at language that they appear to be very, very intelligent, but we have to kind of have an understanding that the basis of that is in the fact that they are wordsmiths. They're just very, very good wordsmiths. And so that's why you get things like hallucinations, you get incorrect sources, because it's more concerned about sounding accurate, essentially, than truly being accurate. And there's a really good quote from Ethan Mollick, who's pretty prolific in this area that I think about a lot. And he says, AI is not good software, it's pretty good people. As in, good software is something that's repeatable, something that you understand what the output of software is going to be. You know that every time you use that software, the results will be consistent. AI is not that, but it's very quickly doing things that we thought were kind of solid human tasks, like brainstorming, like writing, like creativity. And so that's kind of the way that I think about LLMs and kind of what their use might be in education and where they might fall short. And so I'll skip the other two of these slides and we'll start to get into introductions. We may get back to the slides in the Q&A potentially. But before we do that, and while I take a little bit of time to search to see if Rock has joined the call, I have two polls just to get a sense of where the folks on this call are with their AI journey, shall we call it. So if I can get out of this, I will try to stop my share and present those polls. So the first one, I think it's just showed up for you. The first one is, are you using an LLM? And remember, these LLMs are specifically the language-based AI, ChatGPT, Bard, Bing. Those are the big three, and then yeah, I think Claude is the fourth. So I'm curious how many people on this call are actively using these LLMs, and actively we're calling once a week right now. And there's Rock. So Rock, I'm going to put you in Spotlight. Welcome. Now we have all our panelists up at the top. Okay, most of you have answered. I'm going to end this poll in about 10 more seconds and share the results. Okay, so I hope everyone can see those. It looks like about 65%, more than that, close to 75% of us are using LLMs regularly, which is, it's just so, to me, that's what is kind of so powerful about this. There've been a lot of technology trends, I would say, but there are very few where 75% of people are using that technology regularly. Think about, I don't know if you want to think about Bitcoin or NFTs or that kind of thing, but this is something where 75% of us, at least in this group, are using these tools regularly. So I'll go to my next question. Stop the share on this one. Go to the next one, which is a similar question. So 75% of us were using LLM tools, ChatGPT, the most common one. I'm curious how many of us are using non-LLM generative AI tools. DALL-E, the image generator, that's kind of one of the ones you may have heard of, but there are a lot out there. There are hundreds and hundreds out there at this point. And if you're unsure, if the tool that you use isn't a generative AI tool or not, we have the option for unsure. Get to about 10 more seconds. Okay. Yeah, Caleb, exactly. Like Photoshop's dynamic fill. Like you're right. I don't know either whether or not, I would call that a non-LLM generative AI. But I think the big picture results are pretty clear that a lot of us have started using ChatGPT or similar, and a significant chunk fewer at this point are using some of the ancillary tools that also are generative AI, but not kind of the big elephant that we all talk about. But there are many, obviously, applications of generative AI, and I think we'll highlight some of those in this, this panel discussion here. So with that, I will get to our panelists, and I'll just do quick introductions, and then what I'm going to do is, again, I'll ask the panelists to kind of tell us a little bit more about themselves and how their role uses AI or is exploring AI. So I'll start with Miguel. Miguel I've known for a long, long time. Miguel is the CTO of IBL Education, and they're doing a lot of work recently in student support and kind of AI-driven tutoring and personalized support. He just gave a talk last week to the Open edX meetup, so hopefully he's not too tired of talking about this. And I'll come back to you and talk to you first, Miguel. Kelly has a PhD in philosophy, and I unearthed a video of Kelly from 2013 talking about ethics in MOOCs. So Kelly's been working on this for a long time, and I'm sure that, you know, whatever she's learned in the last 10 years is now blown up quite a bit because of this new era of AI in education. So I'm excited to hear from her. Philipp Schmidt is the CTO at Axim. And this is the first time I've met Philipp, but I see that he speaks intelligent about every tech topic from digital credentials to NFTs, now this world of generative AI. And what I did learn, Philipp, is that it looks like you're a subscriber to Econ Talk, which is maybe just a nerdy little thing that a few of us can, you know, nerd out on, but I'm a big fan of Econ Talk. And then Dr. Rocael Hernandez. Rocael Hernandez is a faculty at Galileo University, and I got a chance to talk to him a couple weeks ago, and it is fascinating what Galileo is doing. They are building courses where they're leveraging generative AI at every step, from the lesson planning to the script writing to the image generation, and they're kind of industrializing that process and measuring what the time savings are across that process. So it's going to be really interesting to talk to him, especially for this first section about creating courses leveraging AI. So with that, that's just my introduction, but I want to hear from the panelists themselves. So I'm going to pull up in a moment the first question and start with Miguel, if you don't mind. So Miguel, I gave my kind of introduction, but I'd love to hear from you. What are you responsible for in your position at IBL, and then how does AI tie into that?
Sure. So and thank you, John. You're awesome. So we've been for a long time, especially since Open edX was, you know, first open source, we've been building the learning ecosystems of many big organizations, you know, NVIDIA, Tesla, Cisco, our government here, a couple of others, many universities. And the idea has always been to own your learning infrastructure in a way that's not really possible otherwise, right? And it's very, very data driven, open source. And we were doing, you know, language models with GPT-J, or, you know, before ChatGPT, but obviously once that exploded, the obvious idea that everybody has is each learner has to have their own tutor. So that is what, you know, that is what we're doing. And for me, it's a combination of, you know, talking with people, coordinating with our engineers and our team, because with this generative AI, you know, you can't really just have a wrapper over an OpenAI API or a Google API, right? There's a lot more that has to happen to appease a lot of concerns and needs, right? As far as student analytics, for example, bias, the training data, the hallucinations. So all of that is what we've sort of incorporated into the platform in a way that the instructors and administrators of the organizations that we work with are effectively armed to be able to build these mentors by themselves, right? We don't want to give them a black box, but we talked about the Khan Academy example, right? But that, if you saw sort of the New York Times article, that was a little bit of a black box. We don't want that, right? We want to sort of arm the rebels, and that's what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here. Kelly, I'll move to you next. You are the VP of Learning Experience at 2U. So what does that role do? And then how does AI tie into that?
Thank you, John. Miguel, I love that, arming the rebels. Yeah, so I'm Vice President of Learning Experience at 2U, which is the parent company of edX. And as part of my role, I help to lead a number of the teams that are focused on design and development of course content. But as the Vice President of Learning Experience, it's my job as well to have a perspective and help that, and see to it that in perspective informs lots of other efforts across the organization that have an impact on the experience learners have as they are progressing through the variety of learning experiences that are supported by on the edX platform and across the organization. So as you were saying, John, my background is in philosophy, and specifically the ethics of emerging technology. So obviously I wound up in ed tech, and obviously I'm very excited to be part of this conversation around AI, which shows up in our work in a couple of different ways. There are specific aspects of the platform that are focused on learner support that benefit from advances in artificial intelligence, particularly the ability to engage in personalization at scale. Scale has obviously been a huge part of the mission of edX from the very beginning, right? How can we reach more learners with exceptional learning they might not have otherwise had contact with? And generative AI, specifically some of the text-based models, represent a potential additional huge leap in that direction. There are a number of other ways and places it shows up, but that's where a lot of our energy has been focused, I would say, over the course of the past year.
Yeah, I want to dive into that. I'm sure that your background will make you very popular to talk to over the next while. Philipp, we'll move on to you as the CTO of Axum. What are you responsible for in your organization, and then how does AI tie into that?
Thank you, John. Thanks everyone for being here, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this conversation. Obviously a super interesting topic right now. Yeah, so as many of you may know, Axum's mission is to make learning more accessible, effective, and meaningful for those individuals who are not already being well served by the higher education system, primarily in the US, but through Open edX also in the rest of the world. And I am driving our strategy on generative AI, which looks at kind of three possible areas of solutions. One is teaching and learning, the other one is coaching and advising, and the last one is access to careers. And if I was going to sum up our focus here, it would be on ensuring that the applications that are developed are really developed for the needs of the learners that need better support. Right now, that's not the case. The training data is biased or doesn't take into account the needs of many of the students that are in less resourced institutions. The economic incentives maybe are not as strong for edtech providers to focus on lower resourced institutions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really where we think Axum can make a difference. And we'll do that in a couple of ways. One is we will give grants to innovators in the space to develop tools and applications. We will host convenings. We're planning one later this year that will really kind of demonstrate how this technology could be used to serve the learners that we talk about. Those are, and just to put a picture in everyone's mind, we're losing somewhere between 60 and 80% of the students that start high school with the intention of graduating from college between their first year of high school and the time when they drop out of college. And there are more than 40 million just individuals in the US that have some credits but never finished a degree. And so those are really the learners that we are focused on. And then, of course, in terms of how we're doing this, of course, also through our support and collaboration with the Open edX platform, and not just the platform, but really the community. And so I'm excited to be part of this conversation today.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a couple specific questions coming up that I think we'll talk on this kind of access and equality issue that I'd love to get your thoughts on. And lastly, Dr. Hernandez, welcome. And what is your role at Galileo University? And then how does AI tie into that, please?
Yes, well, thank you very much John, for the invitation. Certainly the panel seems to be very interesting. I think we are in interesting times, and changes are happening quite fast. We can see adoption of AI everywhere, so that's great, and also it brings a lot of challenges. So my role in the university is that we are in charge of all, let's say, digital services, which includes, of course, all the transformation that the university is going underway. So just to give you a fact, after the pandemic, before the pandemic, we were like mostly face-to-face university, 40,000 students. And after the pandemic, we remained mostly online. So about 75% of our online programs remained online. I mean, of all programs remaining online. So we have a great experience, and we started to experiment a lot with AI early this year and so on. So we came up with a lot of tools and methodologies to build MOOCs, and that's a really interesting thing, or for that matter, for building courses. And we can see that it can speed up quite a lot the production process. It's not only about putting together text through ChatGPT, but there are a bunch of tools out there that can help you with video, with images, and so on and so forth. Many of the resources and all the multimedia that you will need for building MOOCs can also be helped with these generative tools. So that's really exciting times on that regard for creating content, but also we are working a lot with professors in order to equip them with with the knowledge, initial knowledge, in order for them to be able to include and use this kind of AI. And also, there's a lot of challenges out there because it's not only about the professors or what the institutions are doing, but also what the learners are actually doing with the tools. And there are many challenges on how this academic integrity can be handled in the future, because in one side you want the students to actually be able to leverage this tool, but in the other side, the way you actually assess them, it has to change, or you have to enforce certain things, or you have to expect things to happen from now on. And that is quite changing a lot the way we see education in general. And also we are in charge of all the promotions to gather new students to the university. So we also enable recently some pilots with and more interactive and generative AI bot to interact and give proper information to possible future learners.
Yeah. When we spoke a couple weeks ago, I'll open up with you, Dr. Hernandez. When we spoke a couple weeks ago, my understanding of your process, and it was brief, is just that you've taken your course development process and kind of almost placed tools next to different pieces of that process that can help save you or save your faculty time. And then you're quantifying that. Can you talk about how that process came about, what tools you found maybe really interesting and helpful so far?
Yeah, sure. I think I can use a couple of slides so people can see it better. And
I think you're able to share. Yeah, give it a shot. And if you can't,
Okay.
then I'll find a way to make it happen.
Okay.
You have started screen share. Participants can now see your application.
I don't know why is that happening. But you can see my screen right now.
We can see it, yeah.
So for instance, we design a lot of prompts. We work a lot with all the prompts and so on, with ChatGPT specifically, to create different kind of learning activities or things that you may use ChatGPT for. So for instance, you can to design the learning path in a course or in a MOOC, then you can work with ChatGPT with learning objectives and so on and so forth. Or if you are thinking about actually creating content, you can create the video script, you can create scripts for the podcast, or even for creating mind maps. And even the ChatGPT is capable of giving you the actual, kind of pseudocode that you will use to import a mind map in a mind map and create a mind map within a standard tool. Also to creating design learning activities, assessment, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot, I mean, ChatGPT, or for that matter, any other generative text AI is really powerful to give you a lot of things. Actually, of course, as you already know, it's not 100% precise in many cases, but that's where the role of the professor or the content producer can come as well, because it has the power to expand your capacity, your reach, or the velocity where you produce things, but also you can, curate the information that is given you back, and then probably add something by yourself, and so on and so forth. So anyone who has already, played a little bit more than just as a beginner with the ChatGPT will see that the more you interact with the machine, the better you understand what are the limitations, but also the capabilities, and where you want to, put your own, thoughts. But also we have another slide here, which in some way summarizes the process of creating a MOOC with AI. So in the left side, you will see the preliminary considerations as in general terms. But when you go to actually building a lesson, and if we think about a lesson that has, for instance, 6 educational videos, we are talking about MOOCs here. So we can generate the video script, we can be helped with the video production, and so on and so forth. So as you can see in the resources in the traditional methods, is this, we summarize some of the time that is required for creating a specific resource. Of course, this varies from case to case, but let's say this is like an average in our case. And if we do it with AI assisted methods, well, then you can really, save a lot of time, so to say. Of course, the person who is using the AI also has to be trained and has to have a learning curve in order to be able to be proficient with this. But it's not only about using ChatGPT. You can see in the right column with the AIs that we have tried and used it for different things. So for instance, for creating podcasts, or for creating supporting images, or mind maps, or learning activities, and for questions and assessments, and so on and so forth. So this is like a brief overview or summary of the time that a given lesson, that in general terms it will take about 14 hours. We can, have savings in time once the operator or the people who is working on this have been training AI tools, about 60–50%. Of course, entirely depends, because if you are producing the videos fully automated with AI, it saves a lot of time. If you are combining video production with real video production, or live video production with AI, well, then you have some savings. And if you go full with traditional AI video production, then that time is not really saved. Of course, you will have quite a lot of support with AI, with, for instance, ChatGPT, with the scripts and so on and so forth. So that really helps a lot. But yeah, so we've been giving this kind of workshop with several of our colleagues, and it has been quite impressive to hear, all the feedback. People really see the power of ChatGPT, or for that matter, any other generative AI tool. But in the other hand, you will also start to uncover that there is a lot of things that you can do and tailor to your work in a very specific way. And once you start to work with this, it becomes really powerful, and it's the kind of tool that you will keep using, because it saves a lot of time and effort, and also helps to connect more information.
You have stopped screen share.
That's a super powerful chart, I think. And you mentioned video. I want to drill into video real quick before we move on to the next section about student support. Video, I think, is one of the more discussed, intriguing, maybe divisive topics for generative AI, because now, as opposed to scheduling a faculty, doing several shoots, editing the shoots, you can actually write a script, clone someone's voice, and we're getting to the point where we can make videos with B-roll or avatars, and cut that process down quite a bit in terms of time. Have you at Galileo had conversations about maybe when that is appropriate and necessary, when it's not, how to decide whether to do, what we call the traditional video maybe versus more AI supplemented video?
Yeah, well, I think we have had a lot of discussion, and I would like to hear all the panelists on this regard. But one important thing is to maintain the human touch and to maintain the authenticity of what we are doing. Because otherwise, if we use all these tools and no one is putting their brain behind it, then it will lose, the real sense in a lot of ways. So for instance, you can now create a video of an avatar. That's okay. I will say that kind of videos is nice, but also, well, an avatar that do not mimics yourself, your image. If you are using an avatar that is actually like you were talking right now in real life and so on and so forth, that's something that we are trying to stay away from, because it will be kind of weird for anyone. And I think it has a lot of value when the actual professor is performing, providing the information, and of course, it's a really human interaction, and we want to keep it as human as possible. So in that regard, we are trying to stay away. We don't know what will be the effects on that, but in some way, we can foresee that people will not feel like a real course if a machine is talking to you, even if it seems like the face of the professor and so on and so forth. So that's a challenging thing, but I guess in the short term, we want to keep it as human as possible in that sense.
Yeah, it's very challenging. I think that it gets into the ethics of ethics as well. But maybe to wrap this up, I'll just pose a question to the whole panel. Anyone can answer is if folks have thoughts about how we do balance the time savings that we could see while still keeping that personal touch that's important in these courses, and how we balance. It's a big question. I don't have an answer to it. I want to know if anyone on the panel has strong thoughts about it.
Well, one thing that I would say is there are different, since every student, right, is going to be different, right? Every grade, every subject, and so on is going to be different. The answer that we like the most there is just empower the instructors to write their own prompts, right, to select their own data, right? And when you're creating specific pieces of content, if there is something that they should include as part of the prompt engineering, because that is better suited for their learners' pedagogy, then just give them the tools to do that, right? So when we are creating content, right, there's one part, which is sort of generating the text, the images, etc., and then maybe the APIs to save that. But for the first piece, for the generating the text, rather than us, let's say as engineers, coming up with prompts, hard coding them somewhere, we say, no, here's an interface and you can create whatever you want. And that is also going to be helpful for a greater degree of personalization.
It's one of the things I really like about this advent of AI is that it is so, we're going to talk about accessibility, and there are accessibility issues, but it is largely accessible to a lot of people right off the bat. So you see this kind of, this audience, people that wouldn't usually be, joining this new trending technology, being able to leverage it pretty quickly. And that, I think, hopefully will help faculty leverage it to do the things that, maybe they don't need to be, doing every single term, and can kind of save their time for higher value tasks. Philip, I see your hand raised.
Well, you kind of just made my point. I was going to say, generally, we try to take a human in the loop approach to these applications, because we do think that, well, first of all, the research actually on human in the loop experiments shows that so far they've been more effective, right? So like the results are better if you have a human involved. But then also we think it leads to a better education system if we augment the powers of the humans to better serve the learners that they want to support, rather than build tools that would replace humans. So I had a bunch of notes on this, but more for the support category. But since it came up now, I wanted to make that point. I think it's less interesting to automate content production that is replacing, if it makes people's jobs easier, like to Rock's point, like if the instructor spends 6 hours instead of 14 hours, and that's what, that seems like generally just a good thing. They can spend those other 7 hours on talking with their students or doing other things. I think then there's also like, can you replicate content much faster? Like if you have to translate it into 6 languages, or you need 1 million different examples that are more targeted at different students' interests or needs, like those kinds of things, absolutely. Let's use technology to automate some of those things, but do it in a way where the instructor is orchestrating and designing that and kind of supporting that.
Absolutely. Kelly, your hand up.
Yes, and I know we want to pivot to support, so I'll be brief, but just seconding in particular, Philip, the point you're making about the human in the loop research. Some of the teams that I help support that are focused on coordinating with university faculty or external SMEs and really engaging in this process of course production. We've drawn the exact same line that you're describing, Professor Hernandez, in terms of like, where there's a specific instructor or specific point of view, privileged access to information, expertise that needs to be conveyed. That's an intrinsic part of the learning, of the value of the learning experience. We don't cross that line, and we are not interested in deep faking anyone, right? Insofar as there are aspects of the learning experience, whether that's sort of like additional contextual information, or even learning experiences that are more based on collective research and not an individual perspective. Those are the areas where investigating for some of the more extreme uses of, for example, avatar-driven video, right? Where what we can guess from, what we can surmise from, the research about how people learn is that having a simulacrum of instructor presence is going to lead to better learner outcomes. However, there is no specific instructor. This is an introductory bridge course, right? That a collection of SMEs put together text, right? We can enrich that with some selected video and give it that sense of warmth without depriving anybody of an individual perspective that might have otherwise been important in some other forms of learning. So that's where we're looking at those targets, but I absolutely adored that grid, looking at the suite of different ways this can show up in augmenting the design, development, delivery of learning experiences overall.
Super powerful. So we will transition to support. We've kind of started talking about it already. I'll start with Miguel, because Miguel, this is what IBL is focusing on. But can you tell me what this new era of AI support looks like? How do you think about it? What are you seeing? And a way I think that would be nice to, the perspective I'd love to hear this from is that it's pretty clear to us as educators and course builders how we can build assessments and help with syllabi and things like that. It's not quite as clear how we can support students. So talk about what that looks like.
So there, first of all, sort of what frames the conversation is specifically who are those students that are not being served by the existing system, either as best as they could or at all, right? So for example, there's a university that we're working with. Big part of the student population that they serve, incoming students, comes from poorer high schools, right? These are not people who have maybe that level of understanding in math that somebody with a high school with many AP courses has. It's very difficult for a student like that to come in and then say, I want to study anything in engineering, for example, because they just don't have the math background. So then their choices are pretty bad, right? Either you stay in college for longer, which is they don't really have the money for that, and it's expensive for the college to subsidize, or, well, there's no human instructor, so you're just going to study something else, right? And right now we're seeing that's a very big gap in equity and accessibility that is pretty brutal, because the most logical choice is just study something else, right? And when we go into the conversation here, we say, okay, so how can those students be helped? Because many times they also work during the day. So it's not like you can have an instructor that is going to be answering during, business hours, right? Sometimes you need that help at night, right? And we know that the closer we get to a one-to-one teacher to student ratio, the better that students perform. So it's not just the motivation problem, it's also just be able to explain things that are otherwise not easily explained. So that's one. Two is, well, how can the instructors, the existing instructors, be empowered to know things about their students that they otherwise don't know? For example, if they have good analytics as far as what are the questions that their students are asking. So throughout the course of a lesson, well, whether it's happening synchronously or not, the students are asking the mentors questions and the instructors can see that. Now, in subsequent lessons, the instructors can factor in the gaps that the learners had, right? So from a support standpoint is reaching into areas that are not currently being served. People who are straight up not being educated right now, people who are being educated right now, but maybe they're too shy to ask a question or busy or whatever. So that is how we think of that. And one challenge with that has actually been, which is completely understandable, but it's the instructors and the people who are currently in charge of that student support who fear for their jobs, for example, right? And they think, oh, this is a job killer, right? One of the big things that we talk about is actually considering that the best new programming language is English, to quote Karpathy in this, is, well, here's how you can have tools that are not an absolute pain to use, so you can include what you know about the pedagogy, which is going to be a lot more than what I know, to educate your students. So that combination seems to be, filling in the gaps. But interested in what you guys think.
Yeah, anyone can jump in on that. Otherwise, I have a question for Philip. But yeah, anyone's welcome to jump in on that. My question for Philip, you brought it up earlier, and Miguel mentioned access and kind of what the potential of this is. Like, are you worried or not? Well, it sounds like you are, but how worried are you about kind of access and equality issues when it comes to leveraging tools like this?
I'm very worried about access and participation and inclusion in this. And I mean, I think that's pretty much our main focus, actually. We think that inclusive innovation will lead to better products and services. So it's not just the right thing to do, but it's also actually the more effective thing to develop the tools and services that are possible with this technology. I wanted to maybe just briefly share two things related to the support, just to kind of build on what Miguel was talking about. I think one, there's a lot of talk about tutors right now, often one-to-one tutors to the students. One interesting thing I saw in the CS50 community at Harvard, they built a first prototype of a kind of Q&A tutor. So the bot is not communicating one-on-one with the students, but it's actually a participant in this public discussion forum. And it can come in and answer questions that no one else has answered before. It can, it can just be a participant, and it gets things wrong, but that's okay, because participants in the discussion forum get things wrong. And just with off-the-shelf tools using existing APIs, I think they're at like 75 or 80% accuracy, which, that seems pretty interesting. And also it's like, now you have this new participant, but, we can kind of just debate with them. It's not that, they're the overlords that are deciding now. And then the second one is, this is an area that we are very interested in, is actually going beyond the off-the-shelf solutions and going beyond system prompting, like the easy ways of affecting the performance of these tools, is kind of the next step. We think is actually collecting additional training data, either from student populations that we're particularly focused on, and also from educators, because there's evidence that some educators are just phenomenally good at engaging with their students in a way that increases their performance. And we can see that in the grades and the student performance, but we don't actually know enough yet about what are they doing differently. And it's often the subtle communication things. But if we can start collecting data on those interactions and use that to train some of these models, that I think would make a huge difference. And so I'll just mention Dora Dembski at Stanford is doing super interesting work in that area, mostly on the in the K-12 sector. And then Cynthia Brazil at MIT, we're having a conversation with. They want to do this in the computer science for community colleges and public institutions area. So I think there's a lot of room for innovation actually in that particular area.
Yeah, I see your hand, Kelly. I'll let you get a last word in. One thing that what I'm hearing is that from a student support perspective, there's a lot of potential here. But what's different about it is that the conversation is often around, well, we can build a model where it ingests your data and we train it to not give students the answers. And then we can look at the data of what students are asking. We can use that data. It's all super useful. But it's something that needs to be built by someone else. It's not immediately available to us as educators, like some of these other course creation tools maybe are. So anyone, and we'll get to you in a sec as well, Kelly, but like anyone have any thoughts on how, in absence, in lieu of these tools at the moment, we as educators can be leveraging these tools for student support, or do we just have to kind of wait?
I can actually pick that question up, John. It's related to the comment I was going to share. I think, in some ways, I am in a bit of a unique position because, at edX, we do have in-house engineering teams who are working on developing this exact type of interaction, right? Looking at specific one-to-one tutoring support, in terms of being able to partner with any learner on the platform and do things like help summarize course content or, engage in a back and forth, even help you assess your own understanding eventually, right? So that's something we are actively exploring rather than needing to look to an off-the-shelf solution. And yet I think some of the points you're raising specifically, Philip, about that we think about a lot, that I talk about a lot, are introducing retaining, I should say, the right types of friction in the learning experience. We want to remove friction. We want to remove barriers to access for those learners who, as you're saying, Miguel, are inadequately served by the existing format, right? And that could be a whole range of different learners. We've spoken about a number of them. Students who are not speakers of the language in which the course is being taught is an example we think a lot about on the edX platform, right? And so things like this one-to-one, re-explain it to me in a way that makes sense. That's a brilliant application of this type of tool. And also, right, we know from research on how people learn, how they transfer skills, how they retain information, that we need to still retain the right types of friction and challenge within the learning experience. So the suite of concerns around academic integrity that come up anytime we talk about AI in education are a great example, right? Because we don't just want to be able to meaningfully measure student progress and like validate, did you really learn this? But the assessment process itself, as well as other forms of friction, like summarize that page for yourself, are intrinsic components of effective learning for certain types of learning outcomes. And so figuring out how we can reach the students who need that additional support, reduce friction for them while still retaining friction for others is a really interesting challenge, especially when we think about personalized tutoring.
And Dr. Hernandez, I see your hand. Just a logistics note, we're at about the top of the hour. This will go 90 minutes to 2:30 Eastern time. I realize some folks may have commitments, and you're welcome to drop off. I'll share the recording, but we'll have time for Q&A because we're going to go to 2:30. Dr. Hernandez, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Well, I completely agree with the remarks of the other colleagues. What I will say is that whether we like it or not, the students are already using it. And that's the main challenge. I mean, we are in the process of building a bot to help students in courses or for general stuff within the university. It's hard and it requires a lot of time. It's not about only using the API, but it can be done, of course. But whether we like it or not, they are already using ChatGPT and some other tools out there. So I think one of the major challenges is like Kelly was mentioning, the friction of the learning process is lowering quite a lot. And that could be a problem because then for on one side, you don't really go through the standard learning process and the challenges that it implies and the capacity that it builds within your psyche, if you like, where to actually find things and come up through things. So I think that's one of the main challenges. Whether we use it our own bot or a site or whatever, that's okay, and that can be built or can be used, but the learners are already using it, and that's a major challenge.
Learners are already using it, and this panel is doing an excellent job of segueing perfectly into each different segment. So now we're going to get into AI to cheat, kind of this broader AI ethics. And I'll start with the most common question that I see, just kind of this, this common question of the general consensus is that AI has, or at least soon will, eliminate our ability to detect plagiarism. It's pretty easy to get around plagiarism detectors, and it doesn't look like that's going to go away. So this is open for everyone. Are we worried about that, and how do we approach that going forward?
Well, if you like, you can.
Please, yeah.
I mean, but yeah, let's say from a university point of view, yes, we are worried. The thing is that most people, I mean, professors, do not see it because you don't see the student actually doing it, but you know they are doing. So, for instance, if you are asking them to do assignments, the way you value or the way you assess the assignment or you evaluate the assignment has to change. For instance, if they had to give a handout or let's say a project or maybe a paper with 15 pages and so on, how do you assess that they have come up with the right learning process? Whether you use or not plagiarism tools, that's okay. But it's not the only thing. It's about how you assess the actual learning happened. And if you think about other areas, for instance, giving assignments or any other of the traditional tools can be, let's say, fully done or almost fully done through generative AI, especially like ChatGPT or something like that. So that's a major challenge, I will say. And I think the students, like I said, the students are already there, the professors somewhat.
Yeah.
Somewhat they have some experiences, many of them not, but also it's not really visible for most of the people, and if they don't see it, it doesn't hurt, so to say. So that's a challenge.
It's a challenge. Does anyone want to try to get specific about how these assessments can change? Because I think that is the answer, but then the follow-up question is always, well, tell me what to do. Kelly, you're brave here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll give a partial answer. The short answer is in a lot of ways, and we're still figuring a lot of them out, I think, like as a community of teachers and learners, but it's something that I think is especially interesting when we consider the interests of the group of like educators, specifically on the open edX platform, where scale is usually a big, or distance is a big part of the modality we're using to teach and engage in the first place, right? So if we think about kind of like current automated assessments, multiple choice, short answer, et cetera, like those things we can easily validate. That's one way of trying to measure learner progress, and we're familiar with some of the ways it's easy to cheat in those formats, and with some of the ways we try to address it, like randomized question banks and this and that, right, to cut down on real-time cheating. A lot of the most common sort of residential on-ground solutions that are available in that space are not available to us if we think about ourselves as a community of educators who are focused on remote learning, asynchronous learning, learning at scale, overall in general, right? So just like naming that, right, as an existing threat with existing incomplete strategies. A big strategy that, we may have tended to employ in the past is to complement purely automated assessments like that with something that aims to explore student understanding in a different way. Which is like essays or longer answer questions, right? The exact type of thing that things like ChatGPT and Claude and Bard are excellent at is now this novel text generation, right? So that threatens our ability. One of the key tools that we had as asynchronously oriented, remote or digital educators to measure learning that's more in the domain of analytical thinking, comprehension, creativity, etc., and removes one of the main tools we had to kind of calibrate our sense of whether students were cheating on some of the easier to cheat assessments, right? Like multiple choice stuff, where it's like, if you're doing great on all the tests and then your essay doesn't make any sense, that raises flags for me as an educator. And so we're losing that tool from the toolkit as well. My team actually put together a white paper. I'll have to dig up the link and I could share it in the chat. It's sort of just like for the community in general about some of the primary ways you can think about redesigning your assessment structure within a course to try to help address some of the predominant threats here. They often have to do with either linking assessments to one another. So they build in a way where I'm not saying like, write an essay on Descartes' third theorem or something like that, but rather asking you to integrate specific things from the course prior into your response, making it so that you at least need to do more prompt engineering as a student and more critical thought to get to that outcome, right? And or it might have to do with personalizing particular concepts from class to your specific work or life circumstances. So to the degree you make it something that is not just generic out of the box, I put in a simple prompt to the chatbot and it spits out something super generic and that's fine. The need to incorporate some of those more specific details. So like I said, I'll find the link. We do have some thoughts, but I think we're pretty early in figuring out not just how do we measure learning in this brave new world, but honestly, what's the type of learning we care about anymore in a world where we're preparing students to live and work and thrive in an environment that's increasingly characterized by the omnipresence, like Philip saying in the chat, 75% of students have used this already, right? What we even care about educating students on is going to evolve as well.
Yeah, I like what you said about exploring student understanding in a different way. I'm fascinated by like this new blue sky of new assessments that are going to be enabled by ChatGPT and other tools that will hopefully serve two purposes. A, they'll be more enriching for the students, and B, they'll be more authentic for us as educators, getting closer to what we are trying to teach. I think small tangent, you know, there was a New York Times daily episode about discussion boards, how students were cheating on discussion boards and how catastrophic this was. I remember a time not too long ago when discussion boards were seen as the enemy themselves because they were so impersonal and stuff. So now here we are holding them up as, you know, the bastions of you know, discussion in our courses. What I'm getting at is I'm excited about, yeah, some of these new ways we can leverage AI for assessment that's engaging and authentic. Examples being, I stumbled across, someone put it up, using AI as a debate partner. So you can actually build, you know, the shell of a prompt and have students, you know, plug in there, whatever they want to debate about, and then debate with an AI. And it's this really kind of enriching, fascinating debate that's at a kind of a perfect level, I think, for something like a university level course. And it's, I think, unique and entertaining and interesting and educational enough that it would be really tough for a student to like put two AIs next to each other and have them debate each other. Like, I would hope a student's not just going to do that. So that's something that we weren't able to do before. You couldn't have a one-on-one debate. Likewise, you know, if you wanted to, you know, the best way to learn is to teach. So you can teach an AI something. You can prompt an AI to act as a student. So these are these brand new assessments that are accessible right now that I think it would be fascinating to look into. I will go to Philip because he had his hand up first. Sorry, Philip, I kind of went off on that. Go ahead.
No, we can go to Miguel. You actually gave some of the examples, and I had a quick look at Kelly's document, which looks great. So I don't have anything to add here.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, and what you said, what you guys said was beautiful. I think that totally agreed. There is one piece of context that maybe sounds a little bit overly simplistic, but you know, what happens when a student graduates and then goes to the workforce, right? So if you're, for example, an engineer, it's not, you know, your tasks on Jira are not going to be an intelligence test of how quickly can you solve them, you know, in the most constrained way possible. It's like, okay, so now you have AI, you have this, you should ideally be, you know, an order of magnitude faster at doing this, right? And it doesn't mean that your output, sorry, I produce many lines of code, it doesn't work. It's like, no, you're still liable for having this work the same way that a student, if they use it right for an essay or something like that, it still needs, the end output needs to be correct. But I think there is one factor of this that sort of gets missing from the cheating conversation, which is, let's just say that we cannot stop the cheating. So then we say, okay, so what's the next best thing? So now maybe we have freshmen solving junior level problems, right? Or undergraduates solving, master's or PhD level assignments. And then once we're all done with all the problems in the world, then it's like, okay, well, now we worry about the the other stuff.
I'm interested in how that ties into the accessibility thing, because you're right, like for a lot of us, we can leverage AI, but then the folks who can't, they're even further behind. But I'm going to move on to Roc, and maybe we can get you in the Q&A. Roc, go ahead. And we're going to open up the Q&A hopefully in the next 3 or 4 minutes.
I have two remarks here. First, at some point we'll need to use more on online proctoring or digital proctoring, even for face-to-face classes. That's what we are foreseeing in some way. On the other hand, I want to share you really quick this.
You have started screen share.
Which actually summarized quite a lot, and I think very well, that in the very beginning, the left side, triangle, we spent a lot of time in putting together the course. And, the professor in a face-to-face situation, not even think about the MOOC, he or she spent a lot of time, delivering the information and interacting with the students. But after a huge amount of time invested on that, we usually end up with a very little, time to transfer experience. But the algorithms or the AI is taking over the information, the data, and even the understanding and knowledge part. And then we can start to see that as educators, we can work a lot on transfer experience. Because if you have more time as a professor, which is not exactly the case of MOOCs, but if you have more time as a professor to dedicate yourself to interact with learners, and they have more tools to, to process the previous parts of the learning process, then you can work a lot of transfer experience. And this is one of the major shifts that organizations like this are foreseeing in one side. And also I wanted to share with you guys, because someone was actually asking which tools we were using for education. I will share this link, and each one of the links, it has, I will share this PDF and it has all the links to different tools. So I'll share it in a second, but someone was asking for that on the chat as well.
That's an
You
awesome
have stopped
document.
screen
Yeah,
share.
I think everyone here would really like that. So I think that's a great way to close it, where our best case scenario, and I think what we're all striving for, is that generative AI can enable educators and course creators to focus on these higher order skills and making those personal connections with students. And that's the world that I think we hope we'll be able to get to here. So I'm going to open up to Q&A. I would prefer that there's 40 people in here. So I prefer folks raise their hand and could come on camera and mic if they're comfortable with that. If not, then you can put a question in the chat and I'll relay it. But I'll open up to questions now, and anyone that has them can raise their hand. We'll start with raised hands. Go ahead, Dandy. I see you first.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. I have a partly an ethics question and partly a question sort of from the lens of training folks for the workplace in a world in which the Keynesian prediction about 15-hour work weeks has not yet come to pass, and people are still reliant on their paychecks for things like food and shelter. So as practitioners in a space where we are promising to prepare you for a better paying job, et cetera, but where we also simultaneously are looking at, okay, how can we do things with AI instead of with humans, and how can we advance this opportunity to speed things up and rely less on the human touch. We've sort of touched on this, but have not really addressed directly, I think, what does that mean for like specifically career-focused training needs and balancing those kind of competing priorities. So that ended with a sentence rather than a question, but I would love to hear folks' thoughts about that, a position on that if you have one.
So Zandy, I feel like I heard a couple of really incredible questions intertangled there. It sounds like one of them is just about the general ways that perhaps we as people who are charged with thinking about AI in our work, think about the displacement of workers that we might be hastening by coming up with all of these great ways that we can use AI in our work as educators or as folks working in the education space more generally. I may have just read this into your question, so forgive me if so, but I think potentially also looking at some of the back and forth in the chat, maybe a question around how do we think about educating learners to engage in the global workforce when that itself is being destabilized in really interesting ways by the advent of AI. Is that a fair restatement of like those questions? Okay. Amazing. I have thoughts on each, but I am already talking, so I would love to be quiet and hear from my fellow panelists instead.
Well, thank you for the summary. And the questions, great questions, certainly very challenging ones. If you look to the forecast on what's the impact of AI, certainly a lot of things will be automated. And it's not only about generative AI, but also robotics is coming strong and it's coming wider. And that will impact a lot of, so there's a lot of transition that is happening. And I think it's a challenging time if you see it in a positive way for us as educators or enablers of technology for education. Because there will be more than demand than ever for transitioning. So in one side, I think these kind of tools can help a lot for transitioning, because then you can somewhat achieve one-to-one follow-up. Besides, without AI, it's really hard. I mean, you put together the videos and the questions and people get into the MOOCs and so on, but there's not personalized learning. I think one of the key things to help on the transition, because the transition will happen. I mean, the replacement and the automatization of tasks will happen, whether we like it or not. What will the governance will do? That's another thing to do. But us as educators or technology enablers, it's really important to think AI as a thing that will help in the transition of millions of people around the world.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I mean, I think those are really big and complex questions. And I think the first one, which is about, I think, general displacement through technology, and there have been waves of that. And I think the fundamental questions there are not so much about this specific technology, maybe, but maybe more about things like capitalism and workers' rights. And, I feel like I'm not an expert in that space, but I am German. I grew up in Germany. I live in the US now. I do detect a pretty different approach to some of these things. And so, I think that's maybe less of a technology question, but I'm also not suggesting that technology doesn't have a responsibility here. But the second one is, I think, more like in our context of education, where people are worried that the technology will replace them. And what I've heard now from people that seems plausible to me is that the biggest fear is not that the AI will come and replace you, but that another human who can use the AI will come and replace you. And so that kind of, I don't know, that sounded plausible to me. And so then what I took away from that is we should really work very hard to make sure that everyone has access to this technology in equitable ways. so that it doesn't become a way. I think someone else said this earlier, that the elites are moving forward even faster and even further. And there's an interesting statistic that I recently saw, which is of the students, faculty, and administrators who are using, who were being asked about their opinion of ChatGPT to support learning. So not to support cheating, but to support learning. The people who were more optimistic were the people who were using it already. They saw the value in it. And so that worries me, because that means the people who are adopting early, who have access to the technology, they see the value, they want to move faster, they are going to move faster. And the people who are maybe left behind, they don't have access, you know, the gap is going to get larger. And so I think we really need to work hard to make sure that both there's general education about these tools, that they're accessible, that they're affordable. John mentioned access earlier. You know, the cost is a huge challenge right now. If you look at the, you know, the first wave was like, there's no business model, it's all going to be free. They're very quickly pivoted to OpenAI's, I think, $20 a month per person if you want, you know, enhanced access. I think Microsoft rolled out Office 365 integration for $30 a month per person. Like, those are amounts that are totally not accessible to, you know, students in most institutions. So I think that's like, we should not take our eye off of that challenge, that if we believe in the promise of this technology, the second sentence always has to be, how do we make sure everyone has access to it?
I want to get to Andrew's question, which I think is a great one in the chat. And then there's also a poll I have. I want to ask a quick follow-up on that, Philip. Like, if I'm an educator and I'm attracted to these tools, and I say there's these great assessments that I can, you know, these great new assessment modalities I can use. Let's take the debate one for a moment. How appropriate is it, or how should I approach an assignment where I tell my students to use ChatGPT, use the free version, hopefully it stays free for a while, use the free version and do this? Like, does that raise access and accessibility issues that I need to be addressing?
I mean, I think if you do it in a way where students in your university or school are going to have to use these tools forever, then that would worry me. You know, right now we're at this stage where like experimentation is really important. So my suggestion would always be, if you have the time and bandwidth to use these tools in the context of your class, and there is a good freely available version, experiment. You know, once you're making strategic decisions about this is going to be part of our curriculum, and, you know, we're committing our institution to this, then I think you need to be really careful about sustainability and cost. And I guess one thing I would add is, from the very beginning, data privacy, I think, is something that is kind of a non-negotiable. So, yeah, you know, OpenAI, I think, has been pretty explicit that they're not using the conversations for further training of their models. You know, so those are things I would definitely pay attention to. If I feel like if that data just gets sucked into some black box and we don't know what happens with it, and you're forcing your students to use it, I think that raises lots of ethical concerns. But so data privacy is like the baseline. If that's not there, I think I would be cautious. And then the second one, if you're making more strategic investments, then sustainability needs to be part of that decision.
I think it's a really great kind of decision tree there. So Andrew had a question in the chat, and no more hands right now. So Andrew had a question in the chat, and it's been started to be answered, but I'll ask it so everyone can hear it. It's on the recording. But is an AI assistant actually personalized learning, or is that just branding? The example is a phone tree is not personalized support. So Miguel, you get first crack at that.
Well, I mean, ideally, we're talking about one mentor per student, right? Because the longer that I have to go as a student and I have to filter through material that is not immediately relevant, say, well, then that's an area for improvement right there, right? So ideally, if I say, okay, so this is what I have to learn, or maybe I say, well, this is a job I'm interested in, so then you tell me what I have to learn. Proactively assess, not just reactively, right? So you're not just waiting for me to ask questions. Instead, maybe there's an assessment at first, see where my gaps are, and then you take that information that you know about me with what is available, let's just say in an approved pool of content, because we want to minimize the hallucination. So maybe we want to say, okay, let's only answer questions if they are in this pre-approved piece of content. Then I can pick up the conversations a little bit more easily rather than if it's some generic solution for everybody. So in this sense, it is personalized, right? It's the difference between you have an individual tutor, even a human tutor who knows you personally, who knows where you struggle, what your pitfalls are, versus being put in a, you know, in a larger pile. And the smaller the pile, the better. But interested in what you have to say, Kelly.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, and Andrew, I appreciate these provocative questions. What I would add, I think, is that if your mission is access, regardless of whether we can almost set aside the question, are people as different as we pretend, right? Maybe not in certain learning environments, especially if we make a really narrow gate to entry. So you need to have done this and have this access to technology and do this. Yeah, you might wind up with a really homogeneous cohort of learners. If your goal is to expand access, you have to be trying to tilt head on at some of the challenges that arise when you have a more heterogeneous group of learners in terms of prior access, in terms of neurodivergence, prior life histories, current access to technology, and so on and so forth. And so I think the question is not really like, you know, is Kelly a special snowflake and she will only learn if you present her with images, you know, and Miguel will only learn if you read things aloud to him, but rather, how can we think about personalized learning, which most of the research that's been done on this has precisely been studying automated opportunities to scale, because you can't scale one-to-one tutoring in most classroom environments, right? If the goal is access, we need to be leaning into the idea that personalization becomes ever more important in terms of students actually being able to succeed. It's not about getting students into a learning experience, but giving them the tools they need to make it through and achieve the outcomes that they want. And students will need differentiated support, especially if that's the goal.
So great answers. Andrew, any follow-up or any follow-up to that? Otherwise, we'll move on.
No, somebody challenged me to say how I would describe it. You know, I'm an engineer, I'm not in product, so I try not to describe things. But I mean, obviously, a tutor working with you is personalized learning. Like, we know what's on one end of the scale. And obviously, we can't afford that for everyone. We wouldn't be in a class about MOOCs. So I think Miguel had a good answer about incorporating where the student is right now. And some of it may also just come down to, like, the industry, the branding part of the industry has already decided to call it personalized learning. Like, we've already decided to say that the AI understands things, and neither of those is true, but all of it is getting our students a lot farther than they were anyway. So we shouldn't worry as much about that as just about giving them a good experience, not, you know, taking care of their information properly, and, you know, being honest about what they can get. So.
Thanks for the great questions. So I'm going to start wrapping up. I have one more poll for the participants here, or for everyone, just to get a sense of our overall feelings, optimism, pessimism around generative AI. I'll give a couple minutes for that, and then we'll wrap up. And while folks are answering, I want to say a couple thank yous to EduNext for making the introduction to Dr. Hernandez. It was great to have him on. Zandy on the call introduced Kelly, and then I don't remember who introduced Philip. I apologize.
I think Eden from
Eden.
OpenEdX.
Thank you, Eden, for connecting us with Philip. It was a really, really great panel. Okay, so the poll is about filled up. And skewing optimistic, but somewhat optimistic with reservation, which is, I think, kind of the tone of this discussion. And so I will I'll thank the panel. It was really excellent to have everyone here with the different perspectives that you all bring. I think we really hit the things that we wanted to cover, and I appreciate your time. I think everyone on the call appreciates your time. Just a reminder again that this is part of the Open edX Educators Working Group, and so we will meet again next month. It's not scheduled yet, but it's in August. So what I'll do is I'll send an email with the recording to this, which you're welcome to share, and then some quick set of instructions for if you are interested in learning more about the Educators Working Group, you can join our Slack channel or our Discuss forum. We'd love to have more folks
Copied.
who are working on MOOCs in edX.org or Open edX. Both are valid. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you again for our panelists. I hope everyone has a great rest of their Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.